So today we're going to talk about lead acid battery charging circuitry. It's by myself, Brady Beecham. So for the introduction, let's tell you about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have a brief chemistry review of what a battery is, what is a lead acid battery. We're going to talk about different charging modes and some associated circuitry. So the composition of a battery is simple. It has an anode, a cathode, some medium for the electrons to flow, and the load attached. The cathode for lead acid battery is lead dioxide. The anode is a sponge lead plate. And the electrolyte liquid is going to be a mixture of 2/3 water and 1/3 sulfuric acid. You can see on this figure different chemical reactions happening. We will talk more about that here soon. For the lead acid battery discharging, we're going to look at figure A, and both the cathode and the anode are going to react with sulfuric acid when there's a load attached to them. In this instance, it is a light bulb being lit. So both the cathode and the anode, they're going to take in sulfate from the sulfuric acid, and the cathode is going to release oxygen. So if you take sulfate from sulfuric acid and give it oxygen in place, it's going to make water molecules. That's why there's so much blue in figure A. It's creating more water. The anode is going to take sulfate and it's going to release the electrons that are going to flow from the negative terminal to the positive terminal, lighting the light bulb. Simple enough. For charging, we're going to do the opposite. You can look at figure B, and it's going to take away that water, and electrons are going to flow from the cathode to the anode. So the cathode is going, both the cathode and the anode are going to release the sulfate they took during the discharging cycle. And the cathode is going to break apart those water molecules and take up its oxygen. It's going to take its oxygen back. And the anode is going to be receiving electrons from the charger. Now that we've dipped our toes a little bit, let's go a little deeper and talk about some battery gassing. Gassing happens when there's excessive charging of a battery that causes electrolysis on the water molecules that splits them into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. Both these gases are very flammable, very explosive, relatively explosive on their own. So that's why you do not want to charge lead acid batteries in a sealed container without any ventilation. Because a buildup of these gases and a small spark and it can explode. Gassing voltage is a function of temperature, which you can see on the right on the graph. Normally it's about 14.5 volts, about 20C to 25C, but it can range pretty heavily depending on the temperature you want to go to. But we're going to stick with about 14.5 volts for gassing voltage for the rest of the slides. Now this figure on the right is vital for the rest of the presentation. It is battery voltage versus charge current. And we're going to be using a 12 volt, 20 amp hour lead acid battery for an example. Sticking with the previous slide statement of about 14.5 volts for the gassing voltage, that's what we have on this graph. You can see that at different states of charge, that's what SOC means, you may or may not reach the gassing voltage. At a 10% state of charge, you're not going to hit it. You can give it 8 amps, no problem. If you give it more than 8 amps, let's say for this battery that it can't handle anything more than 8 amps, it'll damage it. We're not going to think about higher than that. At 20% up to 60%, 8 amps, perfect. We can give 8 amps all the way till then. Just fine. But then going to 65, 70%, you might start gassing. You might start having some electrolysis on the water molecules. You don't want that. You don't want explosions. Even if you don't have explosions, it's still not good for the battery. So we're not going to have it anyway. So at 70%, you might want to back it on down to 6 amps or even 5 amps. 80%, 90%, 100%, you want to go continually decrease your amperage until about 2 amps. At 110%, you cannot charge it without violating the gassing voltage line. So, as the battery state of charge increases, less current can be safely used to reach full state of charge, the gassing voltage. So now we're gonna use this knowledge from this figure, and we're gonna think of some different ways that we can charge some batteries. One simple way is to say, hey, if the gassing voltage is a problem, let's simply have a constant voltage underneath that gassing voltage. That way we'll never hit it, right? Well, let's talk about it. So this is the constant voltage method. On the right is a simple figure. If you want a real life example, think about jumping off another car that has a dead battery. It's easy enough. You attach V1, your battery that's good, to some other person's whose battery has died, which is VBAT. And let's say there's an internal resistance on the battery of 100 milliohms. Simple enough. So let's say that this voltage on the battery that's dead is anywhere from 12.8 volts to 11.8 volts. 12.8 volts being fully charged to 11.8 being fully discharged, deeply discharged. So let's do some quick mental math on Ohm's law. I know we can all handle that. At 12.8 volts on the battery and 12.8 volts on V1, there is 0 voltage difference across a resistor. What this means is that there's also 0 amps flowing across the resistor into the battery. That's perfect. That's just what we want. If it's fully charged, we want nothing flowing. Good. What if it's 12.6 volts on the battery? Okay, well, that's 0.2 volts voltage difference across the resistor. 2 amps going across the resistor into the battery. Okay, no problem. No problem at all. The problem only comes when you get to 12 volts or even 11.8. At 11.8 volts, you have a whole volt difference across that resistor. Now, if my math is correct, that is 10 amps of current flowing through the resistor into the battery. For most batteries, that's going to damage the cells in it, and you might have to buy a new battery at that point. That's why this is not a recommended method, because if you have a deeply discharged battery, it's going to try to take up a lot of current immediately. That's not safe for the battery, so this is not a very good method of charging. What's another way we could do it? No constant voltage? Okay, what if we set the current constant? Let's think about that. We can provide a constant current until the voltage reaches its defined gassing voltage. Seems simple enough, and on the block diagram to the right, it is pretty simple. You have a source, you have a battery, you have to read the charge on the battery, you have to control the current going to it, and you have to have a voltage reference to make sure you know how many volts is actually on the battery. So now we're going to talk about 2 different types of constant currents, trickle and multi-step. Trickle can also be called single step, so single step and multi-step. Simple enough. Single step, trickle, is a very low amperage, very slow and steady approach. Just slowly dripping water into a bucket until it fills up. Very low current, as you can see on the right. You have a current versus time. Low, steady current. The advantage of this is that the gassing voltage is not going to be reached until it's fully charged. That's great. And it's also very simple circuitry. The disadvantage is that it's going to take a long time. As we all know, time is money, so it's not a very cost-effective solution. It's not bad, but it's not very effective or efficient. So now let's take a peek at the multi-step. Maybe the multi-step will be more efficient. Let's find out. This multi-step is almost the exact opposite of the trickle, single step. As the name implies, it's going to have many different steps to it. The initial step is going to be as high current as much as you can send it, and then you hit the gassing voltage, you decrease the current, and you go again, keep that same current until you hit the gassing voltage, step it down, keep going, step it down, keep going. Yeah, repeat, repeat, repeat. It's very quick. You can quickly reach a high state of charge in a very little amount of time. That's a very good advantage. A disadvantage is that one is complex, and two, it's not very efficient when it comes to fully charging a battery. Which you do want to fully charge the lead acid battery. If not, there can lead to other problems, which I'm not going to get into. But there's other problems associated with it. So this seems nice. There might be some way to combine these methods to make a better method, a fast method, more efficient method. Luckily for us, there is, and it's called the fast charge, the modified constant current charging method. It's not really fast. It's efficient. It's definitely efficient, but I wouldn't call it fast. It involves all three steps that we've previously mentioned. It begins off with the constant current charge, which in this case is called the bulk charge. So it charges the voltage with a high initial amperage until it reaches the defined gassing voltage. After that, you're going to pivot to a constant voltage charge, or the absorption phase. And in this phase, you're going to let the battery take whatever amperage it wants. Just like in the initial example with jumping off a vehicle. Only in this case, we know that the state of charge of the battery is already 50-60%. So it's not going to take the 10 amps. So that's good. And there's different ways to know when to transition from the constant voltage to the trickle. The one that I saw was you're going to charge until the current decreases to 0.1 C. C is a battery terminology, and 1 C is defined as the amount of charge it takes to fully charge a battery in 1 hour. So for the 20 amp hour battery, it would take 20 amps to charge in 1 hour. Easy enough. So now, aside from that tangent, we're going to go to the trickle charge. And that's going to be 2.25 volts per cell to maintain the battery charge after the absorption phase. This is going to keep it topped off for as long as we want and get it from that 97, 98% to the 100%, or 99.9%. Here's a visual explaining what we just talked about. You can see on the top you have the variable voltage just slowly increasing until you hit that gassing voltage and you stop, and you do the constant voltage, and then you go to the trickle. On the bottom, you have this constant current, high constant current, so it's going to decrease in the absorption phase, called topping charge in this graph, until you get to the flow charge, and that is when the battery's ready to come off in 98, 99%, and you're done. This is the best way to charge batteries, and this has been my presentation. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.